Investing. Sometimes it feels like you're just lost in a jungle, right? There's all this jargon, so-called expert advice flying at you from every direction. But what if there's a simple, clear path out of all that noise? That's what we're here to explore.
I mean, for so many of us, the whole world of stocks, bonds, and funds, it just feels like an impossible maze. The jargon is just everywhere. The advice all seems to contradict itself. It's so easy to feel totally lost before you even take the first step.
But what if I told you there was a simple, well-trodden path through that maze? A really straightforward strategy that's been proven, not just for years, but for decades. Well, that's exactly the map we're going to lay out for you right now. Okay, so every good map needs a compass, right? And for this particular strategy, our guide, our true north, if you will, is something called the market index. So what is an index? It's a bit of a weird concept because it's not something you can actually buy or own. Think of it more like a measuring stick. A perfect example is the S&P 500. All that is, really, is a list that tracks the performance of 500 of the biggest companies in the US. It just tells us how that huge slice of the market is doing at any given moment. It's a benchmark. Okay, so if the index is our measuring stick, then an index fund has a really simple, almost humble goal. It's not trying to be some kind of hero and beat the market. Nope. It just wants to be the market. Its only job is to mirror the performance of its index as perfectly as it possibly can.
So, you might be wondering, how does this simple goal of just being average turn out to be so incredibly powerful? Great question. Let's take a look at the blueprint.
So first things first, let's talk about risk for a second. Imagine you put all your money into just one company. You're making a massive bet. And sure, if that company skyrockets, you're a genius. But if it stumbles, well, your entire investment can take a huge hit. It's that classic problem of putting all your eggs in one basket.
This is where index funds come in. They solve this problem with something you could call instant diversification. It's awesome. Instead of buying one stock, the index fund goes out and buys a tiny piece of all, or at least most of, the companies in the index. So get this, with just one purchase of an S&P 500 index fund, you instantly own a small part of 500 different companies. That creates this really broad, stable foundation for your money.
The second piece of the magic here is the hands-off approach. Think about it this way. On one side, you've got these active funds. They have a manager, a whole team of analysts, all of them trying to pick the next big winning stock. All that hands-on effort costs a lot of money, and that cost gets passed on to you through higher fees. But on the other side, you have index funds. They just passively follow the index. No big team, no fancy, expensive research needed.
And because they are so hands-off, the fees are just astonishingly low. Seriously, we're talking about tiny fractions of a percent. Now, that might sound like a small detail, but you have to understand, over an entire investing lifetime, paying less in fees can literally mean tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of extra dollars in your pocket. It's huge.
All right, so we get the compass. That's the index. We get the blueprint, diversification and low costs. But what's the actual vehicle you use to get on this path? How do you do it?
Well, for most people today, the answer is something called an ETF, which stands for Exchange Traded Fund. The easiest way to think of it is like this. The fund manager takes all the stocks from an index and puts them into one big basket. Then they wrap up that whole basket so that you can buy and sell a little piece of it on the stock market, just as easily as you'd buy a single share of any other company. It makes getting started super accessible.
Okay, we have our map, we have our vehicle, but where does this path actually lead? What's the destination at the end of this journey?
Right, so the payoff here, it's not some get-rich-quick scheme. This is about steady, reliable growth. It's exactly like the research says. Over the long term, broad index funds have delivered steady, market-aligned returns. You're not just betting on one company to succeed. You're harnessing the growth of the entire economy.
And you know, the real secret ingredient here is time. In the short term, the market can feel like a total roller coaster, right? Full of these crazy ups and downs. But the longer you stay on the path, the more all those bumps just smooth out. And what you see is a consistent upward trend. Patience, it really is your superpower in this game.
So, after all of that, we come to the most important question, and it's a personal one. Is this the right path for you?
This strategy, it really is a perfect fit for a certain type of person, a certain mindset. If you're someone who values simplicity over complexity, if you're patient enough to tune out all the daily market noise, and if your main goal is just steady, long-term growth for your future, then yeah, this path was basically designed for you.
And that brings us to a final kind of provocative thought. Let's be honest, this approach isn't exciting. There are no hot stock tips to chase, no dramatic trades you can brag about to your friends. In fact, it is about as boring as investing gets. And so, that leads to the big question we want to leave you with. Is the most boring path to building wealth also the wisest?